everybody. Welcome to my presentation, my conversation on Americans in labor. Thank you so much for your kind presence today. And I'm going to begin by saying that we often hear that the United States was built on the labor of enslaved people, people who were enslaved out of Africa. The buildings that we are still using in major cities were built by the blood and sweat of these people. There's tons of research out there that supports this, and it is true. The people who were dragged out of Africa against their will, they came in knowing woodwork, metalwork. They knew how to make pottery. They knew how to use their hands. They brought it all with them to the so-called New World. And you have this professor from Arkansas who has done all of this research, and he talks about how American capitalism has basically been founded on enslaved labor. Because enslaved Africans grew cotton in the 19th century, the government supported the enslaved labor, supported it, did not stop it, encouraged it. This cotton was transported all over the world. It made the United States very, very wealthy off of the blood, sweat, and tears of enslaved people. So the wealth comes in a huge part from enslaved Africans. And I also want to tell you that I want to go back a bit to in history, that it gets rather worse because enslaved people, no matter who they were, kidnapped Africans always were the target of rage, no matter if they were enslaved and they were working. Enslaved Africans working as sailors, as carpenters, bakers, weavers, cabinet makers. In 1707, there is a document of these white craftspeople coming in and leveling a complaint against the enslaved people. So they're angry because these people are enslaved, and because they are working, it drives their wages down. And it keeps on going. In 1855, there is a strike from Irish workers in the 19th century. And the strike is because they're also angry at enslaved Africans, because they feel that because these people are working and they're working for free, they're not getting enough money. Their wages are being driven down. It is crazy. They're getting mad at them, but they are in a very horrific position. Okay, but what about now the freed Africans? What about them? They're also, we've got a lot of craftspeople, artisans, porters, barbers, and waiters. 1815, the Napoleonic War, the Napoleonic War, you get a lot of immigrants coming into the United States of America. And with the immigrants coming in, guess who's getting fired? The black workers, the free black workers. Okay? So 1817, people prefer to take in the European immigrant workers, and they're firing around 1817 a lot of the freed African workers. 1846, what you have then is the Irish famine, and then a lot of immigrants from Ireland come in. Again, what do you see? A repeat. Who is it that is targeted? The free Africans. So it keeps on repeating again and again. And I want to tell you that in the North, what you have is a lot of segregation. The South is bleak. The North is also bleak as well, too. A lot of different observers go to the North, and they notice no matter what happens, it's a very hostile environment. And you have Carter Wilson and Lorenzo Green saying, in the 19th century, basically people prefer to give jobs. They tend to prefer jobs to African American women as domestic help, as maids, as washerwomen. If it weren't for the mothers who are working as maids and as washerwomen, a lot of African American households would not have survived. It's very bleak, and then it's so bleak that there are stories of certain people who have basically looked for jobs and looked again and again and said they'll go back to slavery. So, push again. Frederick Douglass is looking at all of this and saying there is something really wrong going on here. Rather than having the white people take a look, the white workers take a look at enslaved Africans and free Africans and say that they are the problems, why don't you have education and let people wake up and understand that it's actually the capitalists who are exploiting the workers and not the enslaved Africans, not the free Africans. You have it all wrong. Wake up, wake people up. There is a common enemy here, and that enemy is capitalism, and that those capitalist employers in the system are doing a great job in leveling all of this rage against Africans and not against the capitalists. So he's like, wake up. And Frederick Douglass, and several other African Americans worked quite hard in making sure that there would be some kind of unions. Philip Fauner, the scholar who studied for 30 years African Americans and labor, he says that in the beginning, in the 19th century, what you have is more like support groups, but not unions in the way that we know them. It's a start. It's somewhere. What Frederick Douglass has to say is really important, and the rage should be directed towards the capitalists and not those who are enslaved. And I want to say that, I mentioned organizations and support groups. There is a lot of bleakness when you look into this story, the story of labor and African Americans. There is one story that has some kind of hope. In 1850, white waiters were getting $16 a month, and African American waiters were getting $12 a month. And the white waiters had a union. The African American waiters did not have a union. And so what happened was the leader of the African American waiters spoke to the white union. He was the only one who was allowed to speak with them. And they came into an agreement. Why not? Let's make sure that the pay is equal so that everybody, both white and African American, would get $16 a month. Did they let the African American waiters join them in the union? They did not. They continued being very racist. But the African American waiters did get a pay raise of getting $16 a month, just like everybody did, just like the white waiters did. I want to move from 19th century. I'm going to move into 1914, 1917, the start of World War I, because there is also a really interesting chapter going on and very interesting incidents going on related to labor. First of all, the United States government was like, you should be patriotic. We're going to join in the war effort. You need to help us. You need to give us money and support and food. And you get African Americans buying in bonds, lending the government money, $250 million.
Say that again?
$250 million, John Hope Franklin. $250 million. African American women, $5 million. John Hope Franklin fact-checked everything. Shania, when I was preparing for this, you don't want to see how many times I threw my books down. Okay, so a lot, okay, tremendous. And this is why I began with the theme of Africans giving and giving and giving and not taking back in return, not even respect. Okay, and I'll get to that shortly. $250 million, okay, in bonds, lending, hoping, of course, for interest to come back. But they were there to support. The government's like, support us. Okay, you're getting supported. And the government's like, okay, we've got African Americans working a lot in farming and food conservation, so let's send out people there to organize, not a union, but to organize so that we could make sure that during the war there is enough. So there's 18 different organizations, and African Americans are continuing to take care of the food and continuing to take care of the farming. So patriotism, money, yes. Food, yes. Finest soldiers, yes. Go ahead. There was this minister who wrote into President Wilson, please make sure you take care of our soldiers, our African American soldiers. We are giving you strong men. We're giving you, our best. Just make sure there is no discrimination whatsoever. Wilson's like, you're being unpatriotic. You're being horrible. You've got A. Philip Randolph telling them, you're saying that you're there to fight for democracy, and that is not true whatsoever. If you were truly fighting for democracy, you would take care of democracy here on American soil. And he was put in jail for 2.5 years for saying that. Okay, so it's a lot of exploitation, abuses, and let me tell you, okay, right around this time, we have massive migration from the South. The factors are a lot and plenty. We constantly hear, what are some of the factors that have led up to migrations from the South to the North? What are they? Poverty, lynching, assault of African American women. We've got the cotton crops, the boll weevil infection. We've got it's ruining the crops. There's also something else. With the onset of the war in 1914 in Europe, immigration from Europe has been going down. So what's happening? Certain people have been encouraging migration from the South to the North. So in other words, people are coming in to push for migration towards the North, and African Americans are going because of all of these different factors. Get away from violence, get away from the poverty. There's a promise of jobs, and they do go up north, and in the North they find that certain labor unions are racist. Okay, so you see that again and again when you are researching and when you're looking at labor unions. It's very bleak. Again, I stress this. The labor unions at times are being used so that African Americans would not join, would not be part of the labor unions. You've got the American Federation of Labor, which does have a racist history. And in 1917, it's like, oh, we'll welcome African Americans. But why? Because they don't want them to be strike breakers, because they've been used, African Americans have been used repeatedly. When white workers strike, employers go and they get African Americans to work. And it upsets the white workers tremendously. Who becomes the target of violence? African American, yeah. The African Americans who have been called by the white employers come and take the place of the white workers who are fighting. So American Federation of Labor is like, oh, we'll welcome them. We'll welcome African Americans into the mix, but it's just so that they won't be strike breakers. Now you have the National Urban League developing, and Professor Edmund Haynes from Columbia University is going around and collecting information how to best make sure that those people, African Americans who are moving up north, have proper housing and can actually feel comfortable when they are up north. He's gathering data. He is going around making sure, is there proper enough housing? Can they get jobs? It's not a union, but it's something. And somebody at least cares, which is a good start. So the National Urban League. But I also want to tell you, there were different factors that pulled African Americans from the South. And when they went up north, they were met up with violence. The one in 1917, 38 people were lynched. In 1918, 58 people were lynched. And in East St. Louis, Illinois, it was absolutely horrific because they were called into this industrial town to work, and the government funded it. And then all of a sudden, what you see is there were mobs going after African American workers, and they shot at them. They beat them up, lynched. A 2-year-old little girl was thrown at a door. So between 40, John Hope Franklin mentions 40 people getting killed. Another mentions 100 people getting killed. And it reminds me of an Arabic saying that says, every penny that I earned is earned with a bullet. So this, you've got these people are going for their own livelihood, to take care of themselves, to take care of their families, and they're met with horrific violence. Okay. So I'm going to move forward to another chapter, and that is the chapter in the 1930s, the Depression. African Americans had a lot of hope that maybe there can be a change. Maybe things can be better. Maybe they would be absorbed into white unions. And no, the white unions are like, this is the Depression. Why should we? Why should we? We should have the unions to protect white workers only. And in 1936, the Congress of Industrial Organization was founded by John L. Lewis. John L. Lewis. And let me see. All right. And a bit of hope, some kind of hope in 1937. This John L. Lewis was like gender and race inclusive. Let's have everybody be part of the union. In 1937, they did negotiate for pay raises for steel workers. And the historians Michael Money and Robert Cornstad said that his movement, the CIO, was a model for civil rights movement. Now, when you start getting into this and researching this, a lot of scholars are going to say, oh, people are waking up. They're realizing labor movement equals civil rights movement. I see it so much, but I do want to mention it. Yes, the rights of labor is also the rights, civil rights. They're all connected together. Honestly, it's not just with John L. Lewis. It's also with other people as well, too. I also want to tell you this. So John Hope Franklin, the great African-American historian, does indicate that there were a lot of successes with John L. Lewis. But also, there are different African American writers who say that the CIO was racist. It's very hard to have a one monolithic story. So I can see the goodness in embracing all races and all genders. That is perfectly fine. That's a start. That is hope. There are actual examples of positive stories of moving forward. But then there are also a lot of examples of they were not really helpful. They were quite racist. Gonna move. Okay. I also want to speak like in the 1930s. This was also a very interesting example. There were 6 African American farmers and 11 white farmers who were suffering tremendously, and they're like, let's get together. Let's form a union. And so the Southern Tenant Farmers Union started out with 11 people, white and black, men and women. A lot of women organized this. It grew to embracing people from 4 different states and 30,000 members. Again, there's lots of hope, but people did, they ran after them as well too. Let me just say that. But it's amazing, like starting, black, white, 11 people, it grows to 30,000. It's good, it's growing, it's something. And I also want to say, like in the 1930s, there was, communism was appealing. Communism was saying that everybody's equal, workers, everybody, all workers are equal. There were black communists in Alabama that organized strikes against lynching. There was the African American female-led, the Sharecroppers Union. It didn't last for long, but it was at least female-led, and this was also very interesting. So I reached up to communism, and then there was the invasion of Poland, and then there was less and less interest in communism. And now I want to go back, and I want to go back to a very fascinating story of the first black union that was recognized, and that had to do with the Pullman Porters. And it started out in the 19th century. And George Pullman was like, let me go and hire ex-slaves. They will be very grateful to be working as porters. And he hired them. And he hired them for lower wages. And as time went on, these men, their children, started working as porters. And they were fascinated with this work. And what happened was, if somebody was married to a porter, they were considered to be an awesome husband. These people were amazing. They brought in money. They knew how to clean up. They knew how to make the beds. They knew how to cook. They were amazing. They had a lot of stories to share with people. It was just very, very interesting, and they were able to buy homes, and they were able to buy cars, but that's not the whole story, okay? They were relatively, you called them rich because the people around them in their neighborhoods were not as rich as they were. That home, that car that they were able to get, it was the product of horrific labor. I want to ask you, how many hours of sleep did you get tonight? If anybody wants to talk. Huh? Yeah, how many hours of sleep did you get tonight? Last night? 7. Who said 3? 3. 4. Is it constant, the 3 or 4? Is it constant? Okay, all right. Seven, doctors say, is the healthiest thing. These men were expected to sleep 3 hours, if they're lucky. 3 hours. They were expected to work 400 hours a month, a whole month. They were expected to take care of all of the linen, all of the pillowcases, all of the towels, and sometimes the passengers got in and they took the towels and they took the bedspreads, and who was it that had to pay for them? The African American porters. They were subject to unfairness. They were subject to a lot of horrific work, and they were also subject to a lot of mental abuse. They were called George, okay, after the founder of this company, George Pullman. But when people asked them, why is it that you hate this word? And they said it was the equivalent of the N-word. This is why people kept on calling them that. Okay? People expected them to be, anytime they called them, they had to be there. If they asked them to bark, they were supposed to bark. Okay? If they had to play particular antics, they're supposed to play. Why? Because a lot of their money, a lot of their income came from tips. And so they had to smile the whole time and constantly smile and smile and smile. And it was really nauseating. And while the fathers put up with it as time went on, with a lot of anger in their heart, because they would not always share with their families what they were going through. As time went on, they're like, this is not fair. Something is not fair. How is it that you could sleep 3 hours a night, and then if a passenger needs your assistance, you're supposed to get up and immediately work? So they tried to ask, they tried to make changes. And there was one day this young man who fell asleep, and he shouldn't have been sleeping. And so they fired him, the company fired him. 11 African American porters went up and they said, can you please bring him back? He's young, he didn't mean it, he was just overtired. Guess what they did? They fired the 11 who went to petition on his behalf. Okay, so the abuses go up, and again, a whole lot of abuses. And people cannot handle it. So one day somebody's like, wait a second, there is somebody who knows how to speak really well. Let's just contact him. Let's see if he would be interested. So, okay. They contacted him, and he is the hero. And before I go into what is it that he did and how he negotiated, A. Philip Randolph was extremely poor. His father was a minister. His father was not just minister religion, but his father was all about social activism and rights. And his mother's like, I am not raising kids who are cowards. I want you to fight, and I want you to be just as strong as you can be. They read Shakespeare. They read a lot of literature. They read from home a lot, and then they went to the Cookman Institute, and from there they learned sewing and Greek and mathematics. They were extremely, extremely intelligent and educated. And when A. Philip Randolph went to college, there was no place that he could go except for City College because it was free. But it was a really great time for him because he could be with radical students, and he liked that. And he was very strong, and he was constantly very outspoken. And he tried several times to create a union and create different unions, but couldn't. And the right opportunity came in when somebody contacted him, and could you please speak on the behalf of the Pullman porters? And at first he hesitates, and then he's like, okay, I will go ahead with it. And so he has a meeting, and he's like, anybody who's going to come into this meeting, don't go talking about this meeting whatsoever. Why? Because the employers of the Pullman company, by the way, one of the executive leaders was Abraham Lincoln's son, okay? They're going to spy, they spy on people, they fight dirty. They don't want African Americans to have a union at all whatsoever. And they sent in spies. They wanted to see if people are attending different meetings. They sent in prostitutes. They gave people cigarettes just to bribe them so that they would not go ahead with organizing and having a union work. And by Tara, okay. And he fought for 12 years and won and ended up winning. And I cannot stress enough how much this win was absolutely incredible. To have the first African American Union was just phenomenal. And then it was also absorbed, I think, part of the American Federation of Labor. And he asked for, instead of 400 hours of work, 240 hours of work. He asked for a pay raise. He asked for the tips to stop, because in stopping the tips, now the employer had to pay. And it was successful. It wasn't perfect, but it was successful. And this was very, very good and very meaningful. And do you want to continue? All right. I have over here, mostly with the Montgomery bus boycott. We usually attach, Martin Luther King, he's the one who led it. He's the one who is the heroic one. And it's true, he is a hero. But we have also E.D. Nixon, who is an unsung hero, and he is the one who was part of the porters, and he was also part of the meetings with A. Philip Randolph. He tried his best to organize a boycott. Him and the Women's Political Council and Robinson, Joanne Robinson. When Martin Luther King hesitated tremendously and did not want to go ahead with the Montgomery bus boycott, E.D. Nixon's like, what are you thinking of? What are you doing? Why are you hesitating tremendously? If it weren't for the African American washerwomen, none of us would be here. Do this for the African American woman. That's the only fair thing to do. And I find it rather tragic that history does not remember him, okay? Martin Luther King did a lot, but it was also E.D. Nixon who had to organize and then go back and work on the train tremendously. He had a lot to do as well, too. Okay. John Lewis, for the March for Jobs, it's also March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. He continued. Martin Luther King, SCLC, SNCC continued in this tradition, and John Lewis, before his passing, he talked about, he pushed for the Employment Empowerment Act so that different organizations people can come in and create unions, and so that people would not, be subject to harm from their employers. So he left that, and till this day, what happened in 2008? What happened in 2008? What is it? That's true. That is true. And what happened then also financially to African Americans during that time? Yeah. Yes. Exactly. Okay. So I bring that up. I ask about that because even with all of these different advances, African Americans have continued to suffer. And in 2008, like you're saying, a lot of them did lose a significant portion of their income and also their housing as well too. The fight continues. Chris Smalls in 2002, when he felt that Amazon was overworking its workers, and when he felt that they were not taking care of people during the pandemic, he started organizing. And Amazon is also like the Pullman Company. Please do not organize. They're really scared. They are terrified. But he kept on trying. He kept on trying and won the admiration of, Senator Bernie Sanders. And the fight will continue. At least there's something out there. But the racism is there, but the unions and the union work is also still there as well, too. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Wazwaz. So for this wonderful presentation, to go along with the information she shared with you today, you guys are welcome to join the library here. They have a plethora of books to share with you that are surrounded around the topic of African Americans in labor. So just take a look at what they have, a wonderful collection, and if it's something that you're interested in, I'm sure they can talk to you about how to check the book out. Okay? If you guys have any questions, you can see me. I'm Tiana again, and this is Dr. Wazwaz. Thank you again.